everyone. Welcome to Cyber Smart Conversations with Harsha. I have with me Danny Pehar, best-selling author, keynote speaker, member of Forbes Technology Council, architect of the cybercrime equation. List is endless. With more than 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry, Danny Pehar has become one of its foremost experts. Thank you for joining, and how are you doing today?
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Harsha. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm a big fan of these shows that you put together, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Danny, and great to have you. One of the things I always like to start with, and we know each other for so long, but for our audience, tell us about your career journey.
So yeah, great question. So I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years now, as you had mentioned. But the funny thing was, I got into it almost completely by accident. Right, I was working at a restaurant, at the time. Specifically, actually, the restaurant was Chuck E. Cheese, and I was actually the Chuck E. Cheese mascot. I don't know if you're familiar with that restaurant, but there's a mouse that would walk around patting kids on the head. That was me. And I knew I needed something a little bit more serious, and I knew I needed a change. And so I got a job, and I remember I was actually looking through a newspaper. If you could remember the last time you might have touched an actual newspaper. And I remember I saw an ad in the newspaper, and it was for a very entry-level role in the cybersecurity industry. And so I went and I applied, and I didn't really even know what cybersecurity was, but I thought, hey, it's entry level. What does it matter, right? If I don't know what it is. And so they were telling me how, this job is so entry level. It was a new job that was even more entry than the previous entry level job, right? And they said, so they were kind of laughing, and they're like, you need to be promoted just to reach the bottom, right? But I didn't care because it was in this really nice building and it had air conditioning. I never worked in a place that had air conditioning before, and I had chairs. I was always standing whenever I worked, and I'm like, man, this is the greatest job I ever had. And of course, I didn't realize just how great it would end up becoming. Right, the industry, well, it was filled with so many different challenges, and of course, with challenges also comes opportunities, and just a wonderful place where I met a lot of people. I really got to learn quite a bit as well, and so it's been definitely a fascinating experience.
Great. Today's discussion is about cybersecurity training for property operations. Now, when you hear this topic, it's like, why do we really need a cybersecurity training for property operations? It makes sense to do building automation system training, how to run these smooth operations, vendor management, maintenance, tenant relationship, budgeting. But as we all know, we are putting so much of technology in the building with devices and sensors, cloud platform getting connected with the traditional building systems. So much of technology coming in the building, and the threat landscape is also changing. Hackers are moving into different domains like buildings, making buildings the target. For some of the obvious reasons, like disrupt the operations, try to look for a path in the IT environment for data, financial implications. Like there are so many reasons. So that's why we felt that there is a need for a specific training program designed for property management team. And so we have Danny here, who has so much of experience in the cybersecurity training. But before we dive into specifics of this training, I would like to hear from you the importance of training for roles that touch technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent question, Harsha. So I think the best way for me to answer that question is, let's take a step back away. You talked a lot about building operations. You talked a lot about property operators. Let's take a step away from that for just 1 second. And what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the first two laws of cybersecurity. And so to be clear, when I say the first two laws, I'm not talking about actual law, but what I'm talking about is something more related to like a mission statement, things that are very important to understand. So the first law of cybersecurity states that if it can be programmed, it can be hacked. And of course, what this really speaks to is the vulnerability associated with technology. And the second law of cybersecurity states that if it can be hacked, it most certainly will be hacked. Okay, and this, of course, what this really speaks to is the probability of the vulnerability associated with technology being impacted in some way. And so when you think about the complicated buildings, the modern buildings of today, and you think about the people who are in charge of working with those buildings, right? Then yes, absolutely, we really want to arm these people with something that can teach them about the threats and the vulnerabilities that are going against their very specific roles on their very important jobs of making sure that those buildings and that technology within those buildings are taken care of, not to mention the tenants and the vendor management associated with this. Right. So absolutely specific cybersecurity training for this industry, for this role is absolutely crucial. And I really think that the best way that speaks to that are those first two laws of cybersecurity that I talked about.
And Nani, you make things so simple and easy to understand. Now, going to your law second, like if it can be hacked, it will be hacked. Because many people, they think that, oh, we have a building in suburb, or our building does not have high technology. We only have simple, like traditional building systems, but yes, they are connected over internet.
You know what? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt, Harsha, but it's such a good point. I just wanted to say this before I forget. I've been hearing that my whole career when somebody says, oh, well, it's not going to happen to us because, we don't have anything too important here, or we don't have anything. And I always bring them back to those first two laws. The one being, if it can be programmed, it can be hacked. And if it can be hacked, it will be hacked. And I'm going to take it a step further. And I'm going to say a lot of times people think that it's the biggest target that the bad guys want. Right. So, hey, it's not like I've got a vault in my building with millions and millions of dollars of cash. Right. Why would somebody want to come here? Right. It's not the biggest target that they're looking for. It's the easiest target that they're looking for. So the very fact that you think no one's going to come here, I don't need to worry about this. That's the very fact that's making you a bigger target, right? Is because you are an easy target. Right.
Yes. Yes. And you're not putting enough effort to secure the building. So yes, you are an easy target. Yeah.
100%.
Yes, because property management team has always been focused on overseeing the property operations, like annual budgets, operating budgets, maintaining the tenant relationship, tenant retentions, and focusing on operational excellence. Now, when we talk about the training specific for these type of roles, we hear that we get training by our IT department. So yes, IT department do provide these cybersecurity training, and in most of the cases, these are online training sessions, like pre-recorded sessions. So how this training is different than the training given by the IT department of any organization?
Yeah, a really, really great question, and I hear that so often as well, right? So let's talk about, as you said, let's talk about traditional IT training. Traditional IT training, when an organization says, oh yes, my employees have taken, cybersecurity training, or it's done by the IT group, or traditional IT cybersecurity awareness training. What they're really talking about is they're really talking about training that's really been designed for the employees that work in an office. And very specific to, and whether, of course, we're talking about a corporate office, or whether we're even talking about working from home, a home office, right? That's really what that training is designed for. And then even though it's really specific to office life, it really then is a glorified version of anti-phishing training. That's really what most of this type of training is, right? Whereas I send out a bunch of phishing emails. If I'm the one in charge, if I'm the one running this campaign, I send out a bunch of phishing emails. I check to see who clicked on it. And then I run training saying, hey guys, we sent you a phishing email. This is how many of you, did the wrong thing. This is what we need to do next time, right? And that's really what it is cybersecurity training, for the most part today, has become anti-phishing training for the office. And that's it. And that is, sure, that's very important for those people who only work in offices. But that does not translate very well for the people who have to deal with day-to-day building operations, where you have access to critical systems like HVAC, critical systems like elevators, and also other factors as well, like managing tenants, as well as vendor management, right? And these such critical systems like the HVAC, like the elevators, if compromised, can absolutely disrupt operations. They can compromise safety and even physical safety, right? And of course, lead to major financial losses. So really what you don't want to do is you don't want to lump all of the professionals that you're working with in the same training. Instead, what you want to do is you want to give these very critical roles something very specific that they can specifically be taught about the vulnerabilities specific to those buildings, specific to their roles, and of course the threats, and then what to do about them. So they could learn about how to protect themselves, how to protect, of course, the building and everyone inside that building, the organization, and the associated technologies, right? So definitely excellent question, Harsha. And there is a huge, huge difference, and you don't want to be naive. Oh, and the other thing that I want to add to that is because this is so critical, and because what we're talking about is so specific and attached to so many critical systems, you don't want it to be a computer-based training program, right? I think what a lot of people will do is if I'm in charge, if I work for a big company, I'm in charge of 5,000 employees. I might just think, okay, yeah, my boss told me I had to get these guys on training. You know, here's a computer program. I'll get them the computer program. I'll send them a couple of phishing emails, and I could check that I did it, right? And so many of the employees, all they do is they just click through it, right? I've seen time and time again stats about people just clicking through these things, right? Instead, what you really want to do, because this is so critical, is you want to have it be an instructor-led program. You want it to be a human that's speaking to them in real time, so they can ask questions as needed and really make sure that they understand. Because again, this is, I would say, a cut above, because they are in charge of so many critical things, right? So kind of a long answer to a short question, Harsha, but a very important question.
So those are really great points, Danny, because instructor-led training. And this is a specific area, not like IT environment, like this is building operations. So a complete different environment, handling critical systems like elevators or HVAC, failing to which can lead to, like you said, physical security, reputational damage, and financial implications. Plus, instructor-led training can help them understand, specific use cases. Okay, if I'm in this situation, how to handle this, or like even things like how to even identify if there has been any compromise.
Absolutely, and it can give them a chance to also tell their own stories. It can give them a chance to ask questions, give them a chance to tell their own stories. When we do computer-based training, we tell them this is really important, and we tell them this matters. You have to take this training. We make it mandatory. But then when they say, oh, but I have a question, who do I ask my question to? Well, it's not that important. We're not actually going to answer any of your questions, because you can't really answer any questions. A lot of times with computer-based training, there's a line from the company, and it'll say it's completely interactive. Of course, when they say it's completely interactive, what they mean is, you click on a red button and the red button turns green after you've clicked on it, or something like that, right? But I'm talking about human interactivity, when you can actually have human interactivity and give proper training and really answer their questions, listen to their stories, share your own stories, and really connect. It just makes such a huge difference.
Yes, yeah, and they'll be more understanding how their role and their action impacts the security in the building.
100%. 100%.
Now, one last bonus question. 3 key takeaways that property operations can do now.
So excellent question, and I always like leaving things with a takeaway, right? So 3 key takeaways. Well, one key takeaway would be, if this is something that it's a somewhat of a new concept to you, the aspect of securing a building or securing building operations, is a great place to start, is with some sort of security assessment specific to a building, specific to building operations. With cybersecurity, one of the great ways that we like to start is knowing, well, what are those vulnerabilities? What is it that I need to plug? Quick story here for you. There was a story that in the not too distant past about a casino that was breached through their fish tank. They had a smart fish tank, and the bad guys were looking for the simplest point to get in, right? And they got in through the smart fish tank. From there, they got into the building, and then from there, they got into some very sensitive stuff and got access to the money, right? And so when you're doing an assessment, somebody typically we tend to only think of the old-fashioned assessments. We don't think of the building, we think of the network, and we think of things along those lines, right? But bad guys don't care. They're going to look for the easiest entry point, and they're going to get in through there. If somebody did an assessment in that casino and they did it beyond just the network and they did it on things like that, it would have spotted the gap within that smart fish tank, and that would have been locked down. So I like starting with an assessment. Another thing that I like to do is, we talked about that second law, if it can be hacked, it will be hacked. I like starting off with the mindset of understanding this most likely may happen. So what's my plan? What's my incident response plan, right? What's the plan if trouble happens? Where do I go? Who do I call? And what exactly am I doing? Because when it does happen, you're going to be panicking and you're not going to be thinking about all of those things. And kind of my sub point to the incident response plan is once you have them. So the first point, the obvious is make sure you have one, right? That's the obvious. The second point is practice it. And I don't just mean practicing it so you can get better at it. It's not just about rehearsing, but it's about seeing what might be missing. So as an example, there's an organization that I was working with, and they were doing an incident response plan, and they wanted to practice it, and they wanted to make it realistic. So they came in on a weekend, they came in after hours, right? And while we were doing it, we quickly realized we don't have access to the washrooms, because in that building, part of their building operations is they would lock the washrooms doors on the weekends. And we realized, well, if we're going to be here for 6 to 8 hours working on this, we have to have access to the washrooms. And so we realized in the event of a breach, we are going to need to have that contact information of whoever it is that can unlock those washroom doors. We need to have them in our incident response plan. We never would have thought of that unless we ran through it. There are certain things you are only going to see if you're running through it. And on that, the point of incident response, the last point that I would add is you want to make sure to have a paper backup plan, okay? Because imagine, and so many things are digital nowadays, imagine you come up with this great plan, everything you're supposed to do and all the numbers you're supposed to call, then all of a sudden that happens to be on a server that you've been locked out of because it's been hit with some sort of ransomware, right? And what's interesting is the people that I talk to that are most prepared, that really have done their homework, that do regular assessments, that do, an incident response plan, those people I find, they're the ones that when I say, but do you have a paper backup? They always say, oh, I forgot that one. That's one of the ones that people tend to forget about. And so my third takeaway is, of course, what we've been talking about throughout today, is you definitely want cybersecurity awareness training, but specifically for the world of building operations, specifically for the world of property operations. Something that's designed very specifically for them to talk about those specific vulnerabilities and those threats, and of course, how to fight back against them. And also something, you don't want it to be something that's some off the shelf, really boiled down to just a basic, anti-phishing computer-based training program, but you want it to be something instructor-led so it can be customized for the team that's training. And that's definitely something that I would highly recommend. So those three is the assessment, the incident response plan with the bonus points that I mentioned, and of course the training. And what I also did was, Harsha, I wrote a really small article, a really small kind of one-pager about those three takeaways, just a couple of things to consider. I'll send it over to you, and that way, if anyone asks you for that paper, you can be sure to share that with them.
That's great, Danny. And thank you, Danny. Those were really great points. Understand what's there in your building, understand the risk, and then plan and put measures to secure your building. And then keep a backup plan, because running building operations smoothly is the key.
100%.
Thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge. And it's always a pleasure talking to you.
You as well, Harsha. Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure.